Hello, welcome. In this lecture, we are going to understand the traveler's account, and the traveler that we're taking up is Al-Beruni. Now, in this lecture, we'll be understanding in detail about what is the importance of the traveler's account and what exactly was the contribution of Al-Beruni. So let's get started. The first thing that we have on the screen is the perception of the society. You see, how do we understand history today? How do we understand history? We understand it from the texts available to us. So, men and women have always traveled in search of work, in search of adventure, in search of, escaping from natural disasters. They've traveled from one place to another as traders. So, traveling is one thing which has been the central theme. Okay. Now, those who came from a different land, okay, and they came to this alien land, of course they found things to be extremely different. The socio-political conditions were different, the economic conditions were different, the mannerisms were different. So all of these seemed really new to them, and as a result of which they wrote about that alien world. Okay, they wrote about that alien world, as a result of which these are the texts that are available to us through which we try to understand the history. One such traveler that we're going to discuss today is, of course, El-Beruni. He wrote extensively on India. How did he reach India? What did he write about India? We will discuss all of that. But first, you need to understand the perception of the society as per the eyes of the travelers. Okay. Now, unfortunately, like I told you, both men and women traveled. Okay. But unfortunately, we do not have the accounts of the women travelers. We read the accounts of the men travelers. So it is not that women did not travel. Of course they did. But we do not have an account of women travelers. We have an account of men travelers. For instance, there is El-Beruni, there is Ibn Battuta, then there is Francois Bernier. All of these. We'll take each one of them individually, but in this lecture, we're concerned with El-Beruni, right? So, this is the perception of the society. And as you can understand, these travelers are coming in for various things. Okay, like I told you, some of them were coming for better opportunities, some of them were coming for trade, some of them were basically were, like I told you, for trade, so they were traders. Some of them were basically coming for simple adventure. Some were actually also coming because what, because of the change in the political conditions, because of the change in the political conditions. What does this mean? This basically means that, you see, India as we understand today, this was not our geographical boundary, right? This was not a geographical boundary. This India is not exactly what it was the time, about the time period that we're talking about, which is the 9th and 10th, 11th century, right? So this India was ruled by a number of different rulers. You see, there was not uniformity, there were different rulers representing their different areas. So, for instance, in the north, there was the Hindu Shahi kingdom. Then other important kingdoms were, there was Malwa kingdom. Okay, there was Rajputana here. Okay, then there was important kingdom in Kashmir, which is Hindu Shahi kingdom. Then there was, Malwa, Nepal, even Nepal, and Bundelkhand. So what I'm trying to explain here is that there was no political uniformity. As we are today, we have a sovereignty, we have integrity and security in India. Why? Because we're basically following a constitution, right? But this is all about a modern society. But the time period that we're talking about, we were nowhere close to being a modern society. We did not have a single constitution to follow. So each and every place was having its own rulers. There were, their individual ways of living, their individual cultures, their individual languages, their individual mannerisms, right? Now, I told you here that there was a change in the political conditions also, as a result of which these travelers came into India. Now, this aspect is something that we're going to discuss in a detailed manner in this lecture today, because this is exactly how El-Beruni entered India. Is this clear? So, we'll be talking about this aspect today. Now, I want you to look here at this picture, which is explaining us about the term Hindu. Now, this is rather important. You see, the term Hindu was derived from an old Persian word used in the 6th, 5th centuries BCE, right? To refer to the region east of the river Sindhu. Sindhu river is the Indus river. Indus river is basically flowing, okay? This is the Indus river. Indus river was called Sindhu. So, to refer to the area east of the river Sindhu. Now, this is the river. What would be the area east of it? This, right? So, Hindu was a word which was used to refer to this area. The Arabs, the Arabs continued the Persian usage and called this region Al-Hind. So, the Arabs called this region Al-Hind, and its people were accordingly called Hindi. Later, the Turks referred to the people east of Indus as Hindu and their land as Hindustan. Very important. You see, what are we saying here? We're simply saying that the term Hindu is derived from an old Persian word. Okay, this term Hindu was used to refer to the entire area which was east of the river Sindhu or the river Indus, right? Now, the Arabs continued the Persian usage. This is a Persian word. Persians used the word Hindu. The Arabs simply continued it. As in, they continued the usage of this word. As a result of which, they called the region what? Al-Hind, and its people were called Hindi. Later, the Turks came in. The Turks did what? The Turks basically referred to the entire area as Hindustan, and the language was called Hindavi. Okay. Now, we're using the word Hindu in this, right? Hindu. The today's connotation of the word Hindu is, is merged with the religious connotation. But the time period that we're talking about, it is very important that you understand that none of these expressions indicated the religious identity of the people. It was much later that the term developed the religious connotation. So please do not understand that when we're talking about this term Hindu, we're actually talking about the religion aspect of it. This is not so, okay? Religion came in at a much later state. We'll be discussing about that also in the coming lectures, but for the time being, you have to understand that this definition of the term Hindu started simply merely as a geographical indication, okay? It was simply referring to the area which was east of the river Indus, as a result of which it was called what? It was called firstly Hindu as the area, then the Arabs called it Al-Hind, the people were called Hindi, then the Turks came in, the Turks referred to the entire area as Hindustan, and the language was Hindavi. None of it has, throughout all of this time period, for instance, starting from the Persian to the Arabs, then to the Turks, none of these had a religious connotation associated with the term Hindu. This is very important for you to understand. You see, we're talking about Persian, we're talking about Arabs, we're talking about Turks. You see, all of these people came in to India. And please, I'm saying it again, do not think of India this India that we understand today, we're talking about a vast geographical area which also included, of course, Pakistan here and Bangladesh here. So we're talking about this extensive, piece of land. We'll be looking into the pictures of it as and when relevant. But I'm saying this for your understanding, for a better understanding, that these are the simple points you need to keep a track of in order to understand this better. So you've understood why the travelers came in. The travelers basically, they were motivated by different interests. They were coming in search of better opportunities, they were coming in search of work, they were coming for business, they were traders, they were soldiers, they were also priests, they were pilgrims, they were simply coming for adventure, they were coming for work, trade. Okay, all of these were the possible reasons. Now, please do remember, women also traveled, but unfortunately, we do not have their traveling accounts. Okay, so we do not have a work to refer to and understand that what was the experiences or the perceptions of the women travelers. Of course, we have a lot for men, and we'll be taking it up in this lecture. So, what we're concerned today with is understanding El-Beruni. So, let's get to it. All right. So, the first thing that we have to understand is the full name. So Muhammad ibn Ahmad Abu Rayhan Al-Biruni. This was the full name, and the time period that we're talking for Al-Biruni is 973 to 1048. This is extremely important, so you can note this down. You see, Al-Biruni, as it has written here, came from Khwarizm to Punjab. How did he land up in Punjab from Khwarizm? Now, this is rather interesting. You see, El-Beruni was born in 973, okay, and he was born in the area Khwarizm. Where exactly is Khwarizm? Khwarizm is in today what you understand as Uzbekistan. Okay, now Khwarizm was an important area. It was an important area. For what reason? It was an important center for learning. Okay, and El-Beruni received his education. He received his education from the best education centers available. So from this, we can simply understand that he was belonging to an area which was known for, learning, and as a result of which he was a polymath. What do I mean by polymath? He was good at very many things. For instance, not only did he know a lot of languages, he was also equally interested in learning about philosophy, about alchemy. We'll be looking into the details of it, but for the time being, you need to understand this. Now, he was well versed with a lot of languages, like I've written here. What were these languages? All right. What were these languages? It was, let's say, Arabic, it was Sanskrit, it was Persian, Hebrew, and also Syriac. So these are the languages that he was familiar with. Of course, Sanskrit is something that he acquired or he learned at a later stage, but he was somebody who was familiar with all these languages already. Why? Because he was coming from a place which was really famous for learning, which was really famous for, education. It was rather an education center. So this is the basic introduction that you need to remember about El-Biruni, right? Now, El-Biruni was from what area? He was from Khwarizm. Like I told you, this is Uzbekistan. How did he land up in Punjab? And this is the point that I was talking about earlier, that some of them actually came because of the change in the political conditions. Now we'll be discussing this point in a great detail. You see, Khwarizm was basically attacked by who? It was attacked by Muhammad Ghazni. It was attacked by Muhammad Ghazni, and as a result of which, what happened in the time period 1017, Sultan Mahmud basically invaded invaded the land. And when he invaded the land, he of course won and he became the ruler. When he became the ruler of this place, he collected the best out of the place. And when I say collected the best out of this place, I'm talking about both resources and people. Okay, so he took a lot of scholars. He took a lot of scholars with him to what place? He took a lot of scholars with him to the place where he came from. Who are we talking about? We're talking about Muhammad Ghazni. So he took them back to Ghazni. You see, Ghazni is the name of the place. It is in Afghanistan, right? So he collected the scholars, he collected the resources and took them to Ghazni. And who were these scholars? These scholars were the people who were best at their works, who were the people of Khwarizm. But since Khwarizm was invaded by Ghazni, he now took them to his capital in Ghazni in Afghanistan, and one amongst them was Al-Beruni. You see, when we're discussing history, it is very important that we discuss these stories. This will help you understand, and it would also, help you solve the questions in the exam, because there's always a history behind it, there's always a story behind it. And as the human, the nature is known to best understand via history, via stories. So the reason why I'm discussing all of this is with you is because I want you to have a thorough understanding of Al-Beruni's philosophy, how he was as a traveler, what did he understand about India. So all of this bit is extremely important. Now, he now we have discussed that he now came to Ghazni. Okay, amongst the scholars, Al-Beruni was one of them. Now, Al-Beruni, when he reached Ghazni, he developed what? He developed a liking for the city. Okay, and he spent his life there until what happened? Until this Muhammad Ghazni came and attacked what? India. Okay, very important. We cannot discuss Al-Beruni's philosophy without discussing Mahmud Ghazni. You see what happened. Let's know a little about Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud of Ghazni is said to have raided India very many times. Okay, raided India many times. You see, we're talking about the time period 1997 till 1030. In the year 1030, he actually died. But what happened before that? He raided India. So, the first time he raided India, he fought a battle against the Hindu Shahi, the rulers that we discussed in the previous slide. So, with Hindu Shahi kingdom. Okay, this Hindu Shahi kingdom basically extended from the areas of Punjab to Kabul. Is this clear? Punjab to Kabul. And that is why I'm saying please do not think of the map of India that today we understand as India uh, as this India that we're talking about. We're talking about an area which includes today India, Pakistan, and also Afghanistan. So Hindu Shahi kingdom used to rule all this area, Punjab to Kabul. Okay. Now, Mahmud of Ghazni fought first with the Hindu Shahi kingdom. So initially, King Jayapala was defeated by Ghazni in the year 1001, right? King Jayapala was defeated, and when he was defeated, he rather took it to his heart as he immolated himself and died. Okay, then his successors were King Anandapala. King Anandpala and Mahmud of Ghazni fought a famous battle which is called Battle of Waihind. In this Battle of Waihind, King Anandpala had aid from the different rulers that were present at that time. So I'm talking about the rulers of Kannauj and the rulers of Rajasthan. So even having all of this aid available, basically you can say that these different rulers of India at that time joined hands together to fight who? So all of these versus the Ghazni, Mahmud of Ghazni. You see, Mahmud was his name, Ghazni is the name of the place he's from, right? And that is why he's called the Mahmud of Ghazni, right? So King Anandpala fought the famous battle, that is Battle of Vaihin versus Ghazni. And what was the result of this? The result of this was that King Anandpala lost. So who won? Ghazni won. Right now, with this victory, a major shift happened. And what was that shift? The shift was that the northern frontier was now open. You see, why do I say that? Because earlier this place was ruled by the Hindu Shahi kingdom. Now, with Hindu Shahi kingdom being defeated, this entire area was actually now open for what? For foreign invasions. And what foreign invasions are we talking about? We're talking about foreign invasion in the sense that first Ghazni came, then Ghori came, then the Turks came, then the Mughals came. So this is an extremely important thing. You see, with the Hindu Shahi kingdom basically getting defeated, they were basically guarding the gates of the northern India. And with these gates getting down, what was the result? Our place was basically now open to all the foreign invaders. So when Mahmud destroyed the Hindu Shahi kingdom, the result of it was that now in this entire area came under the rule of what? Came under the rule of Mahmud of Ghazni, right? Now, just for an additional bit I like to share with you that Hindu Shahi kingdom is not the only kingdom that Mahmud of Ghazni fought against, right? Mahmud of Ghazni also fought against other rulers of India. For instance, there was a battle between Ghazni and Nagarkot, that is in Punjab hills, and Thaneswar, that is near Delhi. So you can understand, starting from the just the northern areas of it, he also won Nagarkot, that is in Punjab hills, and Thaneswar in Delhi, right? Then Mahmud also plundered the holy city of Mathura. Okay, he also attacked Kannauj. So these are the important names of the places. I'm just giving the places names so that you remember and have a a thorough understanding of how the things change. Then he also plundered the famous Somnath temple. You see, Somnath temple, what is this area that we're talking about? We're actually talking about the fight, the war actually, which happened between Ghazni and who? The Rajputana. This was the area which was ruled by the Solanki king. Solanki king, whose name was Bhimadeva. Bhimadeva won. Now, with this battle on, who won? Ghazni won again. And as a result of which, he was victorious in every battle he undertook in India. And in India, again, I'm saying in reference to these areas that we're talking about Mathura, Kannauj, then, Rajputana, then Nagarkot, Thaneswar, all of these areas, right? What happened was that in this battle, Anhilvad was attacked, plundered, and as a result of which Somnath temple was what? Plundered and raided. After this, Ghazni returned back to his capital via the Sindh desert and died in the year 1030. So, this is the entire, historical information and understanding of Mahmud of Ghazni. Now, what do you understand from all of this? From all the points that are written on the screen right now, you simply understand that we're talking about a person who was rather interested in plundering, who was rather interested in, raiding. So, plundering of wealth and raiding the areas was his interest. But was this his sole interest? No. You see, with all this plundering of wealth, with all this raiding, he was also setting up an empire. An empire was being set up. This empire was ranging from Punjab, let me write it here. So, what is this empire that we're talking about? This empire of Ghazni. Okay, Mahmood of Ghazni. This empire was set up from Punjab in the east to Caspian Sea in the west, and from Samarkand, which is Uzbekistan, in the north to Gujarat in the south. Very, very important. So, this was the empire of Ghazni. The names of the places are rather important. To Punjab is east to Caspian Sea in the west. So, from east to west, and from Samarkand in Uzbekistan from north to what part of south? To the Gujarat in the south. Now, this entire region was now under what? Was now under the Ghazni Empire. And we'll not get into much more details of this, because what we're concerned with here is understanding the philosophy, the traveler, that is Al-Beruni. Now, after this, I'd just like to give you another extra point that after this, it was not all over. Then came in Mahmud Ghauri. So this is an important bit. Remember it. But now let's get back to who? Let's get back to Elbaroni. So when Mahmud of Ghazni did all of this that we have just understood, all of this, what happened that along with him, who came into India? El-Beruni also came into India, because why? He was essentially belonging to this place, Ghazni, which was ruled by who? Which was ruled by Mahmud himself. Is this clear? So this is what we're talking about. So now we have understood his passage from Khwarizm to Punjab. This bit is extremely important. Have a thorough understanding of it. Now, El-Beruni and the Kitab-ul-Hind, one of the most important things that you need to know. You see, El-Beruni, what we have discussed up till now is that he has now come in India. So when he came into India, he was almost 40 years old, right? He was almost 40 years old. Now, when he was in Ghazni, he developed a liking for different subjects. For instance, he developed a liking for understanding philosophy, then astronomy, the alchemy, iconography, sorry, ways and measures. All of these things started to interest him. Right now, when he came to Punjab, this Punjab was what, like we have discussed, this Punjab was under the Ghazni rule. Okay, now Al-Beruni spent a lot of time in here. When he spent a lot of time in here, he was rather, accompanied by one set of group all the time. And who were these? These were the Brahmins. So all of the bit that he is going to write in his text, Kitab-ul-Hind, we'll discuss Kitab-ul-Hind in a great detail. So do not worry, just follow what I'm saying, follow the link. So he spent a lot of his time with who? With the Brahmanas. Now, Brahmanas, we're actually talking about, you know, a society's order which is based on what? Which is based on the Varna system. Varna system is basically what? Varna system is the division of the society on the basis of the occupation, and also on the basis of the birth of the people in different castes. Varna are basically four. There are Brahmins, there are Kshatriyas, there are Vaishyas, and there are Shudras. Now, this is something I'm not going to discuss in a detailed manner because we'll be looking into it in a few minutes. So, who are the Brahmanas here? The Brahmanas are the ones who are belonging to the highest most Varnas. Now, since he spent a lot of his time with the Brahmanas, it was but natural that he picked the most about India from which sect? From the Brahmanas himself. So, he was getting himself familiar with, let's say, the Vedas, with the Upanishads. he read about the Manusmriti, right? All of these things now were starting to interest him, right? Now, his literature, whatever he wrote, was in what language? Was in Arab language. Now, why was it in Arab language? Because you have to remember the area that he's coming from, okay? The people that he's catering to. He would obviously write in his native language, but this does not mean that he had no knowledge of other languages. Like we discussed in the very beginning, he was familiar with the quite many languages. For that matter, just to give you an additional bit also, he had also read the philosophy of the Greeks, that is Socrates and Plato, when he was in Ghazni, right? So he was also familiar with the Greek literatures. Now, this is his coming into India, getting familiar with the place, and being associated with the Brahmin Lord. Now, he wrote a book which is called Kitab-ul-Hind. What one of the most important things. Now, Kitab-ul-Hind was firstly, you need to remember, that was written in Arabic. Okay, it is written in a simple and a lucid fashion, in a simple and a lucid manner or fashion. It is a voluminous text. Why do I say it is a voluminous text? Because it is dealing with 80 chapters. Now, these 80 chapters are based on what? They're based on religion, philosophy, weights and measures, laws, iconography, metrology, astronomy, festivals, alchemy, manners, and customs. Now, there are two, three terms here which might seem new to you, so let's discuss this. What exactly is metrology? Metrology is basically nothing but the science of measurements. Then what is alchemy? Alchemy is the science of studying chemicals, right? So these are some of the important chapters that he has discussed thoroughly in his text, which is Kitab-ul-Hind. Very, very important. Now, there was a manner in which this text was written. Now, this manner in which this text is written is rather interesting. You see, the historians say that he followed a distinctive structure for his text, that is Kitab ul Hind. And what was this text? This text followed that the beginning the beginning of each chapter would be starting with what? Would be starting with a question. And after that, he would be discussing that question in a great detail. Okay, that question would be discussed in a great detail, and of course the details of it were based on what was happening in India. So when we are talking about India, of course he has taken it up a lot from what? From the Sanskrit tradition, from the Sanskrit tradition, right? Now all of this was done, and along with this he also compared the tradition with the other traditions in the world. Like I told you, he was very familiar with the Greek tradition, right? So he also brought in a comparative analysis. He also made a comparison. And towards the end of it, he would basically summarize the way he wanted to. So this is how he discussed with all these 80 chapters in the which are dealing with all these subjects that are written out here in his text, Kitab ul Hind. Very, very important, right? Now, Al-Beruni, who basically wrote in Arabic, probably intended that his work would be, something which would get familiar with the people back at his place. And he was also familiar with the other traditions, like I told you, that he was also having a knowledge of Pali, he was also having a knowledge of Prakrit, Sanskrit. So all of these texts, the different texts that were available in all these different languages, these were actually studied by him. And since they were studied by him, that is why I told you here that he always made a comparative analysis in his work, Kitabul, in pertaining to all these different chapters and subjects, right? So this is very important. And as a result of which, he is also known as a master of his work. Why? Because you see, this manner in which he has discussed his work, Kitabul Hind, this is highly regarded by the critics, this is highly regarded by the historians. So this is the important thing that you need to understand about Kitab ul Hind and Al-Biruni. Now, when he came in, things were not always, smooth. Things were not always butter smooth. What was the issue? Now we're going to understand that making sense of the alien world and Sanskritic tradition was something which was initially a challenge. Why was it a challenge? It was a challenge because he was overcoming the barriers to understanding. You see, of course, he was familiar with all these languages. He was a polymath, like we've discussed, but there were some issues. And he has extensively discussed these issues, especially pertaining to the Sanskrit language. Now, if you read the text Kitab-ul-Hind, he has written in there that this Sanskrit language is not a language which is an easy one to learn, which is an easy one to acquire. It is a rather complex language. Let's discuss it here. So he has said that if one wants to conquer this difficult language, it is not going to be easy. Why? Because this difficult language is dealing with an enormous range of words, inflections, and it is something like he compared it with the language that is Arabic. So, of course, getting familiar, understanding the nitty gritties of a new language was something that was a challenge to him. So, he overcame this challenge. How? By getting himself, like I told you initially, also by getting himself familiar with the group that was the Brahmins, right? So, he extensively read our texts, he extensively read the Vedas, he extensively read the Bhagavad Gita. He extensively read the Upanishads. He extensively read the Manusmriti. So this was one of the ways through which he gotten himself familiar with this new language. Okay, and also he was friends with the Brahmins. He rather spent a lot of his time. So a lot of his work or the reflection of the Hindu society. And please again understand, we're not saying Hindu in the relation of the religion here. We're simply saying the area. So a lot of his understanding about India, the Hindu society, was dependent on what? Was dependent on these Sanskrit texts. All right. And it was also dependent a lot on what he was fed by this lot, that is the Brahmanas, right? Now, why do I say that? Because he has in his work also described the caste system that was prevalent in India at that time. So, what are we saying here? Let's look at it. This is from his work in where Al-Beruni is basically talking about the Varna system. Like I told you initially, we'll be discussing the Varna system, and this is where we're bringing it up. So he has written, the highest caste are the Brahmana. The highest caste are the Brahmana, of whom the books of Hindus tell us that they were created from the head of the Brahman. And as the Brahman is the only name or the only other name for force called nature, and the head is the highest part of the body, the Brahmana are the choicest part of the whole genus. Therefore, the Hindus consider them as the very best of the mankind, right? The next caste are the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas are the second. The first is the Brahmanas, who were created, as they say, from the shoulders and the hands of the Brahman. Their degree is not much below that of the Brahmana. So, of course, between these two, the degree is, of course, there's a difference. Why? Because the Brahmins were basically those who were associated with the art of learning. They used to learn, they used to read the Vedas, and they used to also teach. But this was something that was only and only, confined to the people who were belonging to this Varna. Okay, so only the people who were associated with the Brahmana Varna were the people who read the text, were the people who taught the text. The second were the Kshatriyas. Now Kshatriyas, by their very occupation, were those who were given the work of defense. So they were basically the soldiers, they were safeguarding the areas, right? They were the second. Now, according to Al-Beruni's understanding of it, he says that their degree is not much below that of the Brahmins. After the fall, After them follow the Vaishya. Vaishya is the third kind, who were created from the thigh of the Brahman. And the last are the Shudra, who were created from his feet. Between the latter two classes, that is between the 3 and 4, which is the Vaishyas and the Shudras, there is no very great distance. Much, however, as these classes differ from each other, they live together in the same towns and villages, mixed together in the same houses and lodgings. So, this is whose perception? This is Al-Beruni's perception. This is Al-Beruni's perception of the Varna system that was prevalent in India back then, right? Now, the classic example how you can understand that Al-Beruni was highly influenced by the Brahmins or Brahmanas is because this thing that he's discussing here, that Brahmins are coming from the head of the Brahman, the Kshatriyas are coming from the shoulders and the hands, the Vaishyas are coming from the thighs, and the Shudras are coming from the feet. This is a verse from the Rig Veda. It is called the Purusha Sukta. So you see, the mere reason that he is discussing something like this in his text shows us that he was highly influenced, that he highly was familiar with our Sanskrit literature. So he is referring to the Rig Veda here, Purusha Sukta. This is very important for you to remember, even from the exam's perspective, right? Now, this is a verse, okay? Verse from the Rig Veda. So this is something that you need to remember. Now, were the things like this, is the system of the Varna how Al-Beruni has discussed, was it exactly like this? So the historians basically say that the categories that are defined in here, and they introduce a new term which is rather important, which is Antyaja. Antyaja were basically those who were outside this system. Outside this system. So those who were outside this system were basically often expected to provide what? Free labor. Free labor to who? Free labor to, let's say, the king, let's say to the zamindars. Okay, and these people were subjected to, of course, social oppression. But at the same time, they were included within what? Within the economic networks. Within the economic network. Is this clear? So this is basically just historians' way of explaining that. Of course, the description of the caste system is correct to some extent. This is how the society was set up back then. But it is exactly not a true picture. It is not the complete truth. Why? Because when we are laying down this different ways of governing the society back then, it was not exactly as rigid. Okay, not as rigid as El-Biruni has basically explained in his work. Now let's quickly look into the remaining portion that we have to discuss. Now we'll be discussing El-Biruni's perception of India. So we'll be talking about social conditions, political conditions, religious conditions, legal conditions, and also the taxing system. So these are the different heads under which we'll be summarizing and discussing El-Biruni's perception. The first thing is the social condition. Now see, we have understood that caste system was something which was prevalent. Okay, several evil practices were also prevalent. For instance, there was child marriage, there was widow marriage prohibition, that is, they were not allowed. Then there was sati, there was johar in the Hindu society. And when we're talking about sati and johar, we're especially referring to the Rajputana Empire. Then the political conditions. Under the political conditions, I'm rather going, I'm just discussing the important points with you because the details of it are not really important. What you have to remember from the exam's point of view are these important things. So I'll be writing them down, have a thorough look. Then from the political conditions, the entire country was basically, like I told you, divided into small units. So there were small units, they were ruled by their individual rulers. There was no political unity. no political unity, right? There was constant fights within these small units, right? So that was something which Al-Beruni basically witnessed, and also he wrote about who? He wrote about Mahmud of Ghazni's invasion. Also, he said that the feeling of nationalism was something which was absolutely absent amongst the people of India back then. Right? Now, let's get to the religious conditions. The Hindus basically worshipped many gods and goddesses. So, there were many gods and goddesses. Idol worship was prevalent. Idol worship was prevalent. Brahmins had the sole privilege of reading the Hindu scriptures. Like I told you about the first Varna. They were the ones who were only and only going to read the text, and also the ones who were going to teach. So, Brahmins. Also, it was said that these were the highest order when it came to what? When it came to, when it came to the hierarchy. So, even in the religious hierarchy, the Brahmins were at the highest order. Now let's talk about the legal conditions. The legal condition was that, of course, there was a system of getting justice, but this justice basically depended on writing an application to the king, mentioning all the important points, how one has undergone issues and disturbances, and also getting what? Witnesses. Oaths were something that were taken, and there was also an arrangement for oral justice. Criminal law was very mild. Sorry, criminal law was mild. The Brahmins were somebody, we're talking about the highest order again. So the Brahmins were somebody who were exempted from the burden of, let's say, punishment. So Brahmins were punished not like how others were punished. For instance, others were amputated. They were basically, they had to spend their time. They were in jail. That is basically they were held behind the bars. But if Brahmin, for instance, indulged in an activity, a criminal activity, he was punished different from all the other people. How? Because he was asked to fast. He was asked to ask, he was asked to uh, worship God and beg for forgiveness. So the ways were different. On the other hand, the others were basically immediately punished. And taxing system, the king used to take taxes from the peasants. It was 1/6 of the produce. So this is it from the lecture today. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned.